All right, all right, all right. We are here live. We've got Circle Research, Inco Network together here, and I'm super excited. I'm sure a lot of you all have been out there and follow Gordon as I have. Tons of great knowledge and insight, so I can't wait to jump into talking to him as well as the rest of the Circle Research team. And we have Inco Network here, and we have Remy who's going to be joining us to give us some further insights. Super excited to jump into this call. I'm seeing the folks starting to come in. Please, if you have questions, thoughts, interact with us. Let us know what you're thinking as you view it. Really, really excited to join everybody. And with that, let's go to the first scene. Gordon, how are you? How are you doing today?
Very good, Sam. Nice to see
You
you.
know, yes, it's great to see you as well. We were chatting earlier about the new Spotify, I guess they call it the rap, Spotify rap that came up. And I was sharing with you that my number one artist of the year is Billie Eilish. I think is her name, Billie Eilish. I've been, singing all her songs all year. I'm curious before we start off, I got to ask, what's your number one artist of the year?
Taylor Swift. She's been my number one artist for a while.
Taylor Swift, Taylor Swift, Taylor Swift. Hey, listen, shout out to all the Swifties out there. I am not mad at you. Not mad at you. Great to see all the viewers coming in. Man, we are jumping up. I already see 55 people coming in. So this is wonderful. I'm really happy to get this started. Um, I want to start off with you, Gordon, while you're here and just talk at a high level um, about circle research. I'm curious, can you share perhaps a little bit more um, on an overview of Circle Research and maybe its mission a little bit?
Sure. So Circle has been around as a company for a bit over 10 years, and Circle Research is a relatively new function that's established in the last, I would say, a year and a half or so. And it's an expanding team as well. And then the mandate is very clear: is to deliver R&D and innovation that could propel Circle forward in providing economic prosperity to the world. Uh, Most people probably know Circle for its stablecoin USDC, but I think that's, if you think about the long journey that Circle has been on and the future journey that Circle will be on, research is core to building additional R&D, building additional innovation on top of USDC, but also adjacent to USDC for a broader network and for a broader platform. So I see Circle Research being at the core of this drive for innovation in the blockchain space, this drive for innovation for payment stablecoin to be more widely adopted, more widely usable for everyday individuals and businesses. And thinking about the various areas of research, there's also multiple facets, whether it is research from the deep technical engineering front to more of the incentive design, market structure design, to even more just dissemination of best practices and best knowledge of reserve management. So these are, I would say, Circle Research is wide ranging in that front, and we are excited to propel this whole space forward.
No, and I mean, you definitely have been. What would you say would be maybe some of the unique challenges, unique challenges, and maybe opportunities that you see in the current research landscape in blockchain technology?
Yeah, I think blockchain research, and it's quite interesting, right? The whole space has only been around, for a little bit over 10 years, and really the active part of research related to on-chain economy, decentralized finance, has only been around for, I'd say, last 5 years or so, particularly in the last 3 years. So given the nascency of this entire field, I think there's both a lot of challenges, but also tremendous opportunities. On the challenges side, you have, given it's a less established field, there's less, I would say, rigor around some of the research topics. You have now more participation from the traditional academia space, but mostly research is still led by the industry, led by initially developers, then dedicated research teams. So some level of formalization is really helpful, and having broader support of not only the best and brightest within the industry, but also connectivity with those who are in universities who have been doing research on cryptography for a long time, but not necessarily in the space of blockchain, not necessarily in the space of decentralized finance. Kind of linking up the two has been historically a challenge, but I think we're making quite a bit of progress on that. If you see now at some of the major uh, research conferences, you do see very close collaboration between industry and academia. Um, some of the other challenges is probably just the speed at which innovation happens. Every single month, every single week, you're seeing new things that pop up. Even within a very confined set of topics. Today, I think we'll talk about confidentiality and FAG. The space is also evolving rapidly. So you see research and applied research and applications all coming online at the same time. It's a really exciting space to be in, but it's also quite a lot to get a handle on what is the latest development in each area, and not just being able to follow the latest developments, but also contribute to the research.
Fantastic, fantastic. You know, someone like myself coming from the developer community, how is it that you feel that the Circle Research team is able to engage with the developer community, as well as the broader research community as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, Circle Research team has, it's relatively small at this point. Right now, we have, I would say, two and a half, three folks who are fully dedicated to research, other than me, and it's an expanding team. We are making our way to be more engaged with the community. I think we are. Last year, we plugged in quite a bit into some of the developer conferences. We plugged in with a lot of partners across the ecosystem. And I think coming from a background of being in academia before, having that sort of connectivity is also quite helpful, especially in the space that oftentimes translate the more fundamental research into practice. So our doors are always open. I think Circle Research is represented by the individuals on the research team. And later on, we'll have the pleasure of introducing some of the team members. But it's really the people that matters, and it's led by uh, the folks who are doing research, rather than a Circle Research as a nebulous entity on its own. So we're excited for the conversation later with Alex, Kylie, and Adrian.
No, I think that's great. I think that's great. I have one question to ask you before we jump in, because as you said, it's important to talk about the whole team. My final question on with you while I have you, Gordon, is comes down to prioritization. Like, how does it? There's so much, right? Our community's huge, research is huge, and there's so much to do in the blockchain space. How do you feel? How is the Circle Research team able to kind of prioritize the focuses that they aim at?
I think it's about identifying key areas that drive not only Circle's mission, but the industry's mission on bringing in mass adoption of this technology for the benefit of the end users. If you think about the most relevant areas of product that Circle offers, which is payment stablecoin, there are core issues that are very fundamental for the usage of stablecoins as a payment instruments. these features, such as privacy that we'll discuss, and such as identity solutions and fraud deterrence, these are just core areas of focus. For research to really bring the product to the next level of usage more broadly. So that's one side of user-centric focus in terms of here's the long-term priority in terms of additional features we could add, additional usability we can add, and how do we translate the more fundamental research to align with these longer-term features. And then there is a set of considerations because Circle sits at this regulated intersection between the crypto and blockchain space and the regulated banking space. There's a set of considerations also for a set of research that's needed for payment stablecoin to be more adopted, or blockchain technology, more broadly speaking, to be adopted by regulated institutions and accepted by major financial regulators and standard-setting bodies. So some of the research on that front are also quite keen to be prioritized, and those include things that are focused on. Last year we released, or earlier this year we released a paper on capital ratio. How do we think about capital framework for a stablecoin issuer? And how should we, now we're doing some research on what are the ways to backstop black swan events if a blockchain goes down. So these are a set of research that's aimed at not only the practitioners, but also some of the policy regulators that also are needed to facilitate a greater adoption of the technology.
Awesome. Hey, look, let's go ahead and make sure that we get the rest of this team, because that's something that you've been talking about. I'm going to pull to the side, stay in the background. You know what? You and your team really are the stars of the show. So let's go ahead and bring up the rest of the team.
I have a pleasure to introduce to everyone Alex Kruger and Adrian. And Alex and Adrian have been a core part of Circle and Circle Research. So today we'll discuss a bit about their work before diving into the work that Kylie will discuss with Inco. So let me start off with Alex. Alex, you recently wrote a blog post on temporary approvals. Why don't we just start off on that? Tell me a bit about, first about yourself and also about your most recent work in this area.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm a software engineer at Circle. I work on the research team with Gordon. I've worked in the crypto space for almost 7 years now at various companies, including Coinbase and Phantom Wallet before coming to Circle. Like Gordon mentioned, recently did some work on a concept called temporary approvals. And just to talk a little bit about that, I'll start with current ERC20 approvals. So the ERC20 standard on EVM has this concept of an approval where you can let some other address spend your token balance. And that's typically used in DeFi to let a smart contract, say like a trading settlement contract, to spend your token in a DeFi transaction. In the settlement contract example, it would be so that it could settle a swap between you and another party. So the way these approvals work today, they're permanent. So these approvals stay in place until you explicitly revoke them. The problem with that is if the contract that you interacted with and you approved becomes compromised at some point in the future, then your token balance could be spent maliciously. So temporary approvals are a proposed extension to the existing ERC20 standard that use a new feature on EVM called transient storage. And transient storage allows you to store a value for the duration of a single transaction only, and then the value is discarded. So the proposed extension is allowing you to give spend access to your balance, but only for a single transaction.
That's great. And with temporary approval, could you discuss a bit of the current use cases and also the future use cases of this new standard?
Yeah, so I think the use case here is trying to is twofold. The first and primary use here is for security. So as I mentioned, like a traditional ERC20 approval, you have this until you explicitly revoke it, you have exposure to this contract that might be compromised at some point. And there's a lot of situations where you just don't need a permanent approval. So for example, like let's say you have a USDC balance and you want to deposit that into Compound for a one-time transaction. You don't need a permanent approval to do that if you just want to make a one-time deposit. So temporary approvals could be a way for you to just approve the contract once for a single transaction, deposit your tokens, and then you don't have any further approval. So from a security perspective, temporary approvals are kind of a win-win for both the user and I would say the DeFi protocol. So for the user, you limit your exposure to the transaction that you're wanting to make. For the DeFi protocol, you're limiting sort of like the incentive to hack your contracts, essentially. If there's less approval outstanding for your contract, you have less exposure to loss for your users. And then the second benefit I mentioned is gas cost. So temporary storage, given that it's discarded at the end of a transaction and doesn't live forever on chain, it's cheaper to interact with than permanent storage. So you could actually save your users some gas as well.
Yeah. Those all make a lot of sense. And, at Circle, we strive to bring the most secure way of transacting and interacting on chain for the users. And that's probably one of the reasons why, you decided to write this blog post to propel the industry forward in terms of adopting safer techniques, and not just safer, but I can also see that this is quite useful in terms of improving usability, because many of us probably have multiple wallets in which there are some wallets where you just want to try different newer protocols for, but we with temporary approval, we probably could not have as much need for rotating through wallets just to get the same type of security guarantee. How do you see Circle, being the standard setter here? How can you see Circle being supportive of this temporary approval standard, even more than promoting it through this type of forum?
Yeah, so the research kind of put it out there and described its benefits for people to digest. Circle obviously can't make any promises about like what we'll adopt in the future, but it could possibly be something that's implemented in our own tokens like USDC and Eurocoin. And yeah, I hope to I hope the blog post and the research helps educate both like DeFi protocols and people launching tokens that this is an interesting standard that can give better optionality and security to DeFi users. And yeah, if you are somebody listening and you're interested in temporary approvals, I mean, there's a draft ERC live that's still up for comment called ERC 7674. And OpenZeppelin actually has a draft implementation of the ERC extension in their contract library right now. So anyone who's interested in playing around with it, either from like the token perspective or the DeFi side, there's many ways to interact with it currently.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. I will now turn to Adrian. So for those who are interested, please check out circle.com/research to find these both papers and blog posts. Adrian, tell us about fast confirmations. It's an area that I think touches my heart because blockchain is all about making transaction settlements easier and more seamless. Yet there's always this question about, what is considered settlement finality? What is considered final? This new research blog post that you put out with some really good empirical tests, I think speak to this question. So tell us about it.
Sure. Thanks, Gordon. And yeah, just a quick intro. My name is Adrian Sahoyan. I'm a software engineer here at Circle, and I originally joined Circle in 2017. So that was before USDC was on mainnet, and so I've worked on a bunch of different stuff over my time. But most recently, I've been lucky to, contribute to Circle research, including a recent blog post that Gordon mentioned, which is called "Exploring Confirmation Rules for Ethereum." And that blog post really highlights and kind of dives into another paper that was published by researchers at the Ethereum Foundation, Consensus, University of Canterbury, and Off-Chain Labs earlier this year that proposes a confirmation rule for the Ethereum consensus protocol. And what a confirmation rule is it's a algorithm or determination that could help you decide whether a block will remain in the chain long term. And so in Ethereum, after the merge, we have a proof of stake system and the Gasper protocol that provides very strong finality guarantees. And for many off-chain applications, if they want maximum security, they rely on Ethereum finality, which on average will take around 15 minutes in order to finalize a block. But some applications may need to balance sort of different latency requirements against safety. And for them, research like the confirmation rule, which could help you under certain additional assumptions about the Ethereum network, confirm blocks very quickly. And so our blog post was an attempt to highlight this, pretty exciting paper, try and kind of explain it maybe in slightly more kind of layman terms and help folks develop an intuition for it, because the paper itself is pretty lengthy and has fairly complex notation and security proofs. And so we wanted to try and find a way to maybe distill it and build more of an intuition around it. And then we also ran an empirical study applying the rule to actual mainnet activity over a limited time period, but had some results and shared those as well in the blog post.
Yeah, in your empirical test, which I find really fascinating coming from an empirical research background, you did encounter, I would say, things are multi-block reworks that was in that test time period. But this fast confirmation rule was able to kind of overcome the issues with the multi-block rework. Could you talk a little bit about that and the significance of that?
Yeah, so the confirmation rule allows you to kind of tune it based on, I suppose, your safety or risk tolerance. And so one of the inputs to the confirmation rule that you could configure is an estimation for the percentage of validator stake that may be held by malicious validators. And so depending on how you tune that, and that would be anywhere from 0 up to 1/3, that'll affect basically how quickly the confirmation rule will confirm blocks. And so we performed this empirical study over a period of 6 days and applied different settings to the application of the rule, which produced different results. But what we saw is sort of if you set that at a low level, sort of on average, you see blocks being confirmed at around 30 seconds. At a more sort of conservative setting, you see them being confirmed around 1 minute or so. And as you mentioned, over that period, I believe there were around 50, 56 sort of 1-block reorgs and then 1 2-block reorgs. And none of those blocks were under any of the configurations of the confirmation rule confirmed, which is great. And all the blocks that were confirmed under the confirmation rule did remain in the chain long term and were eventually finalized. And so, what we saw, again, it's just a limited, period of time. And there are some caveats around our implementation of it, which we did open source, and we list some of the approximations and kind of caveats to our prototype of the confirmation rule. But even under with all those caveats, it did perform well under that time period. So that was a kind of exciting result. To do a more involved empirical study would be really interesting. So doing it over a longer period of time and sort of a optimal implementation of the confirmation rule would probably confirm blocks much faster. And the paper outlines kind of like theoretically in optimal conditions, if you were to run the confirmation rule at the beginning of a slot, it should be able to confirm a block by the end of that slot, which is very exciting. And to do that, I believe you would need to potentially look to integrate the confirmation rule directly into an Ethereum client. Whereas our implementation is sort of tooling and scripts that run externally to a client and query a RPC endpoint to retrieve fork choice data periodically. And so that creates a bunch of latency. And so it's a wholly unoptimized version, but even that being said, confirm blocks effectively and relatively quickly over the time period we looked at.
I think this is a really significant result because it's quite helpful. For instance, bridging through Circle's cross-chain transfer protocol, having faster confirmation essentially could allow faster, more seamless cross-chain experiences. Well, in the interest of time, thank you so much, Adrian. So for those interested, please check out the blog post. Let me turn the conversation to Kylie and Remy. Kylie has been a founding member of Circle Research and engineering lead at Circle Research for the last year and a half or 2 years. Remy joining us from Inco. They're going to chat about the new Confidential ERC 20 standard proposal paper they recently released. So please come online.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. So just a little bit of background on me. I joined the research team before there was really a research team like 2 years ago, and have the honor of working with Adrian, Alex, and Gordon. And I guess a fun fact of how I got into crypto, which is relevant for what we're going to talk about for the next 30 minutes, is my first project in crypto was actually through a grant from Tornado Cash. And it was an anonymity tool for Ethereum transactions. And it was quite the introduction to crypto. But ever since then, I've just found privacy and blockchains just super fascinating, because privacy is needed for good and also can be used for bad. And we'll get into more of that later. But we're joined with Remy from Inco Network. It was such a pleasure to collaborate with them on this project over the past few months. So I'm going to turn it over to Remy. Can you share a bit about yourself and what Inco Network does, their mission, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. Super excited to be here. And yeah, it's been great working with your team. So my name is Remy. I'm the founder of Inco. So been in space since 2017, worked as a crypto VC, also engineer at Microsoft and Google. I was one of the founding members of a DeFi protocol on Polkadot that had over 500 million TVL. And yeah, I've been working on Inco for the past year and a half. And so what Inco really is building is a confidentiality layer for blockchains. So we're not a private blockchain like Hyperledger that's very separate and siloed. We're not a application like Tornado Cash or Railgun that's very application specific. We're also not a separate L1, L2 ecosystem where you have to move user funds or users to your chain, like Secret Network, Oasis Network, or Aztec. We'll reach this layer that sits on top of existing blockchains to enable confidential compute. So yeah, super excited to talk more about the paper that we released a while ago, and yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So before we dive in, it's kind of like I think people are wondering, how this partnership came about, and yeah, what led to the birth of this project?
Yeah, so when we raised our previous round, the seed round, so Circle Ventures was part of that funding round, and given the fact that we are enabling a unique privacy tech to public blockchains, and also Circle's positioning as a leader in the stablecoin space, there was a lot of synergies in sort of exploring the payment side of things, the private payment side of things, with a different angle. And FHE here is the underlying cryptography that we're utilizing to do confidential computes. And for the longest time, FHE has been known to be impractical until more recently. So there was a natural fit to sort of apply this new technology to a problem that really hasn't been completely solved in the past, and using a very different angle. And then, to our pleasant surprise, there are differentiating factors that we'll just touch on a little bit more later on.
Yeah, thanks. And just to add on, we were really excited to work with Inco on this because, like Remy said, it's a very unique type of privacy solution that isn't a chain, isn't a protocol, and there's like an opportunity to add privacy and compliant privacy at the token level. And Circle as a the top issuer in stablecoins can bring like the perspective on the design of such a compliant private ERC20 framework. And so that's what we kind of set out to do. So yeah, let's just dive into the project itself, and more on the motivation of why we were interested, why we started this project from Circle research side. Well, just to back up on wider transparency versus privacy, a very common double-edged sword in crypto. Transparency is great, right? You can verify your payments. You can even trace when a hack happens and identify bad actors. And that's something that makes blockchain very unique as a feature, not a bug. But on the flip side, we need privacy in a lot of cases. And I think something that is commonly misunderstood, and curious if you agree about that, is privacy is often thought about as a one-dimensional feature. You either have privacy or you don't. But in reality, it's much more nuanced than that, because there can be many parts of a transaction, such as the who, the sender and receiver of the transaction, and then there's also the amount of how much was sent with the transaction. And we can kind of think about different use cases that require a different part of the transaction to be private. For instance, if you are going to the doctor, you might want to hide the sender and receiver so that people don't know that you're going to the doctor, no matter how much you're paying them, or donating to a political campaign or something. And we call that anonymity. But on the flip side, if you're just hiding the amount, that might apply to use cases like payroll, or enterprise use cases, the supply chain. It's fine for people to know that you're an employee of a certain company, but they don't want people to know how much they're getting paid. And similarly, vendor companies don't want their competitors to know how much their clients are paying them. So with that put into perspective, we call the latter category having confidentiality as opposed to anonymity. And that's what this ERC20 framework focuses on. Just to make that clear, we're just hiding the amount and not the sender and receiver. But yeah, with that background, let's kind of go into the overview of how the framework works. And if you want to pull up any visuals or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So happy to give a quick overview of what Confidential ERC20 is about. So, from a high level, really Confidential ERC20 is very similar to the regular ERC20. So we are retaining the same core functionality. So, being able to have a balance, being able to transfer, being able to mint. And here, the difference here is that you have a encrypted balance. So what this really means is if you look on chain, the amount of tokens that you hold is private. People cannot guess how much tokens you have. And if you want to do any type of transfer or payment, you can actually send a confidential amount to the recipient. So I'll say that's the most basic differentiation compared to a regular ERC20. And so, this token can exist either as a wrapper, so you can turn a regular ERC20 into a confidential ERC20, or you could also be minted directly by a provider or any other issuer. And there are two other functionalities that we'll dive a little bit deeper later on. One is around this idea of delegated viewing, which is optional. And then the second one is around this idea of programmable transfer rules, which is also optional. So as I mentioned earlier, we are leveraging a cryptography called FHE, which stands for fully homomorphic encryption. This cryptography is different from something else that people might be familiar with in the crypto space, which is more ZK-based solutions. So what FHE really does is one thing, and one thing really well, which is encrypting data, but also allowing you to compute on top of it. So imagine you encrypting this number, you can still square it, and by the time you decrypt, you have the actual right answer. So this is really the magic of FHE. It allows you to do data transformation without having to see what it is. And like Kelly mentioned earlier, the transparent nature of blockchains, it's great because you can verify that nobody's cheating, there's no double spending. But there is one drawback, which is it's quite inconvenient for practical reasons to have everyone's bank accounts wide open, right? So FHE, given it is cryptography focused as well, it's based on cryptography, and you are able to sort of replay transactions and then recompute and verify that things have been done correctly. In my opinion, is a very natural fit for the blockchain space. So it is deterministic, and anyone can verify the compute. And here for decryption, there is a separate network that's MPC based. So for folks who are non-technical, imagine every decryption done by a group of people so that nobody can cheat. And the idea of programmable decryption is quite interesting because now you can delegate viewing to different parties. So a couple scenarios here: if you're a user, you can view your own assets. What if you need to delegate to your friends or family for getting some assistance? So you can do this fully on chain. If you're an asset issuer, if you need to monitor the asset lifecycle, for example, track the velocity of confidential payments, you can also customize these rules fully on chain. If you're government, you could also design around legal-based compliance monitoring. And if you're an auditor, or let's say you need to do taxes, you can delegate viewing to, let's say, your CPA. So all these things are very flexible with the confidential ERC20 framework. And the second point is really around this idea of composability. So there are a couple of benefits here. Today, if you were to transfer, let's say, USDC to a private application, whether it's for private lending or trading, that you sort of already leak information based on the amount that you transfer because everything is transparent. But this is a problem solved with confidential ERC20 because now this encrypted amount can be transferred to a different application. And so you do have this preservation of end-to-end confidentiality that can be quite necessary and useful for things like dark pools or any private trading systems. And the second part is really around this idea of composability. So with the confidential ERC20 as a basic primitive, you can imagine doing a confidential voting, lending or payments because of this idea of composability. And quickly on this programmable transfer rules, what this really means is you could enforce transfer rules based on plain text rules, so your typical block list. But you can also think about novel ways to program transfer rules based on encrypted information. So whether it's, let's say, your age, your geographic location, any transfer limits, that's encrypted, stored on chain. So based on this private information, you can still customize logic of whether or not some money should be transferred to another recipient. And so what this really means is all these things I mentioned above combined, it really gives you a pretty comprehensive framework to reprogram any compliance, business logic, and also risk management as a developer or provider. And yeah, so we have more information with our paper here. So here's the link. And yep, feel free to take a look if you want to learn more about this framework.
Yeah, and just to double click on some of the things you said, the composability part is a unique benefit that isn't always found in other privacy protocols or solutions. And I think that's, very, very connected to some of the technical decisions that arose as part of this project. And so we'll love to, hear more from your own words about, the comparison between commitment-based protocols and more encryption-based protocols like this confidential ERC-20 framework.
So one of the reasons I really liked our research collaboration is it was really, like you said, comparing commitment-based solutions versus encryption-based solutions. And I'll say, the commitment-based solutions historically have been solutions, leveraging ZK. So you can think of, Zcash, Zether, Cape, versus encryption-based systems that are, MPC, FHE. I'll say that category is relatively newer in the crypto space. So, being able to contrast the pros and cons has been quite useful in sort of seeing the differentiating factors. And yeah, I really see, I would say there are two major differentiations. One is around this idea of flexible decryption that I mentioned earlier slightly. And then the second thing is around composability. So I'll start maybe with the first point around flexible decryption. So when you have a commitment-based system, usually that's ZK-based, typically you need a separate wallet that has a viewing key. So every single user has their own viewing key. And so if Bob sends money to Alice, Bob has to generate a ZK proof and also specify Alice's viewing key. And so, this is also great because, it means that things are really private. Everyone can only see their own balances. The downside here is it's a very rigid system for delegating viewing. So for example, if Alice needs to do her own taxes, it makes it very difficult for her to delegate the entire viewing key to, let's say, a CPA, which, in that scenario, the CPA will be able to see Alice's private balances forever, right? It's also difficult for, let's say, a company or an issuer to delegate viewing for, let's say, an investigation or auditing of expenditures in the company. Overall, it just makes it a lot more rigid. The encryption-based system is a little bit different because typically people would encrypt everything under the same key, and this key is essentially shared. And the way you can guarantee that the security of this key is still robust is, typically it's NPC based. So there is a threshold requirement of participants so that, to decrypt something, they all have to agree to decrypt something. And the benefit of this is that all the rules for decryption are inscribed on chain. And so you can imagine casting a transaction or via governance changing these rules over time in case you need to, let's say, do an audit or delegate viewing for any reasons. And the second point is you actually don't need a new wallet. So here with the confidential ERC-20 framework, people can just use their MetaMask. So it's going to be a lot more seamless in terms of user experience. And on composability, I briefly touched upon this during the presentation. If you think about the way things are built in Web3 today, you have something like ERC-20, a basic primitive like ERC-20 that's being used everywhere. It's used by Uniswap for trading, Compound Ally for lending, and you can also do things like flash loan. And the reason why this works is really because of this idea of composability, meaning that one application can be built on top of another application in an atomic manner. And this is also how sort of you create network effects, right, in this entire Web3 space. So the confidential ERC-20 standard does have a similar property. Because it is an encryption-based system, you can transfer a private state to another private state. It's really this idea of shared private states. So for example, if I hold a confidential amount of ERC20, I can cast a vote using the same confidential amount without leaking how much tokens I have. And you really get this property because of this idea of composability. And so I would say that's one major differentiator. In the commitment-based system, the challenge with composability is that everything happens off-chain. The circuits, the secrets, the proof generation. So it's just very, very difficult to have this idea of composability across private states using ZK-based systems. And the second point within composability that I think is actually quite interesting and useful for adoption is it also allows you to be compatible with existing tools. What I mean by this is we can actually hold a confidential amount of ERC20 using a Gnosis safe or smart contract wallets, which is not necessarily something that you can easily do with a ZK-based system that typically has a spending key or requires an EOA to generate a proof. And I'll say, this part is also quite useful for thinking about long-term adoption.
Yeah, so composability is kind of comes from two design decisions from this framework. One is the encryption being encryption based, and the other is just the fact that it does extend the ERC20 standard, and just like the ERC20, it's a building block for composability. Awesome. And kind of diving more into the compliance side of things and programmable transfer rules. One thing that I at least was really interested in, found really interesting when we first started working on this, is something you pointed out early on, which is when there are checks in the transfer function, let's say, it cannot revert like a normal ERC20 transfer function would. For instance, when someone's balance, if Remy is trying to send me 10 USDC and he only has 9, if he if it reverts, then there will be some information leaked about how much is actually in his balance. And that kind of applies to programmable transfer rules as well, when you're checking if there's certain requirements that are met. So yeah, let's kind of dive more into what programmable transfer rules you see as like probably most common with the framework, and ones that you're excited about.
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting about FHE is not only you can do operations, you can also do comparisons. So in the case of whether or not you're allowed to transfer, maybe a simple example would be, do you have enough money to begin with, right, to be able to send that amount? And so the way you could do this is you could do a FHE comparison, and there are ways to design conditional logic without actually having to decrypt. And like you mentioned earlier, if you actually were to fail a transaction, actually that leaks information about the underlying balance, right? And so the way this happens is over FHE, you do these hidden comparisons, and then whether or not the logic passes through, what it really means from an external perspective is whether or not you have transferred 0 or the actual amount. And so this is how you're able to basically preserve privacy without leaking information when you build using confidentiality. Generally speaking, I do think the idea of programmable transfer rules is super interesting because you can imagine, especially for things like real assets, we recently joined the ERC 3643 Association, which is really focused on this idea of on-chain real assets. And we've done some exploration around what else can you bring on chain, such as your identity, that can determine whether or not a transfer should happen, right? So we've proven that this is feasible, and this is also utilizing the same logic that I mentioned earlier, which is as you do these comparisons, maybe one party is not allowed to transfer to another party because of their age, maybe, or net worth, or geographic location. They can just end up transferring 0 without leaking the actual information, right, about the underlying information. The other pieces that I think are quite interesting to program is really around this idea of decryption rules. And so you, as that developer, or even issuer, you can really now think about, under what conditions do I allow people to decrypt information, either for investigation or even simple things like, I'm a company, I have, marketing departments, BD departments, and I really need to delegate you into my, treasury department for, auditing the expenditures. So very low, I'll say very practical, use cases that does require some kind of a programmable decryption rules. This is something that I'll say like the encryption-based system really shines. It's really allowing you to be able to change these rules in a very flexible manner. And I was actually reflecting back a little bit more on this. The challenge, I think, with a commitment-based system is that you kind of have to know ahead of time who gets to see what, and specify at the proof generation time. And the encryption-based system, because it is based on on-chain rules, this is something that you can always retroactively change the logic, and then in case you need to investigate, you can also easily change the logic and fulfill that. Maybe one concrete example, maybe for a retail, is also if I deposit a confidential amount of ERC20, let's say, to an exchange, I want to prove that I've been victim to a dusting attack. What I could do is actually just delegate the viewing to the exchange, and then they can see all the money that has come in. And so, I do think from a practical adoption perspective, having the most flexibility on customizing not only transfer rules, but also decryption rules overall does create a stronger framework for planning ahead for compliance and risk management and such.
Yeah, totally. And I think like the flexibility of the decryption rules is part of what makes this so powerful. You can even do things like IAM groups, like your AWS accounts, having an entire division within a company have access to certain number of accounts, and also make it based on time of the transaction, and just give a limited access to like maybe 1 year. So yeah, and going into more use cases that you are super excited about. Obviously, we mentioned payroll, enterprises, just more payment use cases. But what else is out there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we really see confidential ERC20 as the most basic primitive, and obviously this can be applied to stablecoins, utility tokens, RWAs. So it's pretty broad, I would say. And so yeah, beyond payment payroll, you can think of token vesting. People could be building trading systems. So once confidential ERC20 is released as a primitive, the next thing people typically want to do is like be able to trade or lend out and do DeFi. So I would say this is a very exciting direction to see how can people build on top of this basic primitive because of this idea of composability. And then long term, I do see also a lot of value in the real asset space where this idea of privacy is very much needed, and there could be novel primitives around identity, on-chain identity that's private, that can also interact directly with this these like token transfers and transfer rules. So I do think I'm really excited to see what people can build on top of existing primitives, and what newer primitives can also come into the space, and then allow people to remix other ideas as a whole.
Cool. And looking into the future of confidential ERC20s, is there something that is top of mind for you as extensions to add on top of what we have built so far?
Yeah, definitely. It is still a very new concept, this idea of confidential ERC20 as a primitive. So we'd love to invite builders, researchers to help us, take this to production. And then there are many ways you could contribute. Feel free to make a PR to the open source repo. But the reason why I say this is, I think getting the interfaces right is very important. So, Alex from the research team mentioned earlier, this approval function is super crucial to enable DeFi. So everything, if you think about like how AMM works, you need to give approval, and then you need to have this transfer from functionality as well in order to do DeFi. So In a similar way, Confidential ERCs 20 would have similar interfaces, but there could be additional interfaces are quite crucial and necessary in order to build a very practical DeFi ecosystem on top. So from that perspective, we'd love to get more feedback from communities, and anyone who's interested in contributing to this standard are welcome to reach out to us or Circle research team to contribute.
Yeah, I think the best way for people who are interested to get involved is just to start building on top of it. There's so many potential use cases, blind auctions, things in DeFi, on top of more mainstream use cases. And, the use cases are what bring the requirements of the technology. So awesome. I think we're at the top of the hour. So thank you so much, Remy, for joining us today. And I'll take it back to Sam.
Wow, this was such a great discussion. When you said we're at the top of the hour, I was like, it's been an hour already. No, this has been great. Thank you for everyone joining in. I mean, we're talking about close to, I'm seeing now 700 folks live listening into this conversation. Clearly shows that there's a need for this sort of content. So really want to thank everybody here that participated in this and helped just spreading that knowledge to the community. Gordon, before we sign off, any last minute comments?
Yep, keep an eye out for more to come from Circle Research. And my last line for this is privacy is not a crime. And there's much more going on in the stablecoin space.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And Remy, just a reminder for those wanting to build on Inco, what's the best way to reach out? What's the handle, the Twitter handle they can follow?
Yeah, so our Twitter handle is Inco Network, all attached. And you can go to our website, inco.org as well, and then reach out to us, Remy at inco.network or team at inco.network. We're quite responsive, and yeah, definitely would love to collaborate with folks interested in contributing to the center.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for this incredible discussion. Man, over 700. I mean, you guys could just keep talking. I think people would just keep coming and coming and coming, but I know we have more to do. So thank you, everybody. Thanks again for the community for joining in. Make sure to visit our Discord. You can go circle.com/Discord. The conversation continues there. You can come hang out with myself, Javi, and the rest of our DevRel team. Circle Research is there. Product teams are there. We're all there, all the circlers. So make sure to go and log in, circle.com/Discord, and we'll continue the chat. Awesome. Look at that. Awesome job. Yes. Thank you. Everybody for joining in. Thank you. Take care. Goodbye.